For 50 years, my best friend and I sat in the same corner booth of the same diner every Tuesday morning, and I believed we told each other everything. It was only after she died that I learned the one enormous thing she never told me. My name is Marcia. I'm 65 years old. I live in Davenport, Iowa, and I want to tell you tonight about Carol, who was my best friend from the time we were 15 years old until the day she died last winter at 64, and about a secret she kept from me for almost 40 years, sitting 3 feet away from me across a Formica table, every single Tuesday, never once letting it show. Carol and I met in the 10th grade, assigned to be lab partners in a biology class neither of us cared about, and we were inseparable within a week. You know the kind of friendship I mean, the once-in-a-lifetime kind, the one where the other person becomes a second self. We were not alike exactly. I was the cautious one, the worrier. Carol was bold and funny and a little reckless, the one who got us into things and then got us out of them, laughing. But from the moment we met, there was never a question of whether we would be in each other's lives. We just were, the way your own hand is part of you. I have read that everyone gets, if they are very lucky, one friend like that in a lifetime. The friend who is not just a friend but a witness, the person who sees your whole life and holds the record of it. Carol was mine. She knew the girl I had been at 15, gawky and unsure, and she knew the woman I became, and she was the only person left on earth who remembered both, who could say, I was there, I saw it, I remember when. There is a particular loneliness that comes when that person dies, a loneliness I did not understand until last winter. It is the loneliness of becoming the only keeper of your own story. No one else remembers the beginning. No one else laughs at the old jokes. The witness is gone, and you are alone with the whole long history, and there is no one left to say, yes, I remember. I was there too. We grew up together in the truest sense. We were each other's maids of honor. We had our babies a few years apart and raised them as cousins. When my mother died, it was Carol who sat with me through the night. When Carol's marriage went through its hard years, it was my kitchen table she cried at. For 5 decades, through every season a life can have, we were the constant for each other, the one who had been there for all of it, the one who remembered the whole story. Let me give you just one picture of what she was to me, so you understand. When my son was born, there were complications, and for a few hours it was not certain he would live, and my husband, the one who would later leave, fell apart and could not be in the room. It was Carol who was there. Carol who held my hand. Carol who, when they finally placed my living son in my arms, was crying as hard as I was. This child who was not hers. Because to Carol, there was no real line between her family and mine. That was always how she was. My children were her children. My disasters were her disasters. I knew that about her, I thought. I knew she would do anything for me. I just had no idea, until last January, the literal extent of anything, and the booth was the heart of it. Early on, when we were young mothers desperate for an hour away from the diapers and the noise, we started meeting on Tuesday mornings at a little diner on Brady Street, in the back corner booth by the window, and we never stopped. For nearly 50 years, that was our standing appointment. Every Tuesday, 9 in the morning, the corner booth, 2 coffees, and 1 order of toast we split. The waitresses changed over the decades. The prices changed. The diner got new owners twice. But our booth was always our booth, and the people who worked there came to know that on Tuesday mornings it was held for the 2 old friends, no matter what. I should describe it to you, because it became almost a third person in our friendship. It was an ordinary booth, red vinyl gone cracked and patched with tape over the years, a table with a little chrome edge, a window that looked out on Brady Street and the world going by. There was nothing special about it to anyone else, but to us it was a sanctuary. We had 1,000 rituals there. Carol always sat facing the door. I always faced the window. We always split 1 order of toast, white toast, extra butter, because in the early days we could only afford the one. Even decades later, when we could each have ordered a feast, we still split the 1 toast, because it was ours. Because some things you do not change. The young waitresses must have wondered about the 2 old women who came every Tuesday and ordered almost nothing and stayed for 2 hours. They could not have known that they were watching the longest love story in either of our lives. We solved the problems of the world in that booth. We raised our children in it, in a sense, talking through every fever and every heartbreak and every report card. We grieved our parents in it. We celebrated grandbabies in it. I could not begin to tell you how many thousands of hours of my life were spent across that table from Carol. But I can tell you it was the safest place I have ever known. The 1 hour of every week where I was completely, perfectly understood. I thought, in all those years, that there was nothing she did not know about me, and nothing I did not know about her. I was wrong about the second part. To explain what I found after she died, I have to tell you about the worst year of my life, which was 1986. I have not spoken much, over the years, about that year. It is a strange thing, how the worst seasons of our lives become the ones we say the least about. But you cannot understand the size of what Carol did unless you understand the size of the hole I was in, so I'm going to tell you plainly, the way I could never quite tell anyone at the time. In the spring of 1986, my husband left me. I will not dress it up. He left me for another woman, a younger one, and he did it suddenly and cruelly, the way some men do, and he left me with 2 children, ages 6 and 4, and almost nothing else. We had a house, a modest little house I loved, with a mortgage that had always been a stretch even on 2 incomes. And suddenly there was one income, mine, from a part-time job at a doctor's office that did not begin to cover what 2 incomes had barely covered before. I was 36 years old, blindsided, terrified, and drowning. He had handled all the money in our marriage, the way couples did then, and I discovered very quickly that he had also handled it badly, that there were debts I had not known about, that the small cushion I thought we had did not exist. Within a few months of him leaving, I was behind on the mortgage. The bank sent the first letter, then the second. I sat at my kitchen table at night after the children were asleep and did the arithmetic over and over, and no matter how I did it, the answer was the same. I was going to lose the house. My children were going to lose the only home they had ever known, in the same year their father had walked out on them, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I want you to understand how complete that despair was. The house was not just a house. It was the one piece of stability my children had left, the one thing in their shattered little world that was still the same, and I was going to fail to keep it. I lay awake every night that summer, rehearsing how I would tell them. I looked at apartments I could not really afford either. I was as low as I have ever been, and I was too ashamed to tell anyone how bad it really was. Even Carol. Especially Carol. Pride is a strange thing. I could cry to her about the divorce, about the heartbreak, but I could not bring myself to say the words I am going to lose the house. I have failed my children, because they felt like the most shameful words in the world. There was one night in particular that I have never forgotten. It was August, hot, and I had gotten the letter that said the bank would begin foreclosure proceedings, and I sat on the back step of that little house after the children were in bed, and I cried in a way I did not know a body could cry, the kind of crying that comes from a place below grief, from pure animal terror. I remember thinking, very clearly, that I had become the thing I had always been most afraid of becoming, a woman who could not take care of her own children, a failure, alone. And I remember looking up at the lit windows of my neighbors' houses and feeling that everyone in the world had a life that was holding together except me. I told no one about that night, not even Carol. I want you to hold on to that I told no one, because it makes what comes next almost unbearable to me now. And then, in the early autumn of 1986, the miracle happened. I have to tell you what that letter did to me, physically, because despair and its sudden lifting are things the body feels before the mind catches up. I had been carrying the foreclosure in my chest for months, a stone, a weight that made it hard to breathe, that was there the instant I woke every morning. And I opened that letter standing at my kitchen counter, and I read the words "Your account has been brought current," and the stone simply, impossibly, lifted. I had to sit down. I sat right down on my kitchen floor with the letter in my hand, and I sobbed. But for the first time in months, it was not from fear. I did not understand it, but I was not going to lose the house. My children were not going to lose their home. Someone, somewhere, had reached into the worst moment of my life and pulled me out, and I did not know who, and I have spent 39 years not knowing who. I got a letter from the bank, and I almost did not open it, because I knew what bank letters said by then. But this one was different. This one said that my mortgage had been brought current, that an anonymous payment had been made, a large one, enough to cover the months I was behind and several months ahead. I read it standing in my kitchen, and I did not understand it. I called the bank, certain it was a mistake, and a kind man told me that no, it was not a mistake, that a payment had been arranged on my behalf by a party who wished to remain anonymous, and that he was not at liberty to say more. And it kept happening. For nearly 2 years, every time I crept toward falling behind again, every time the math turned hopeless, another anonymous payment would appear, just enough, always at just the right moment, as though someone, somewhere, was watching my account and catching me every time I started to fall. I never found out who. I tried at first and got nowhere. The bank would say nothing. I wrote a letter to the anonymous benefactor and gave it to the bank to forward, thanking them, weeping my gratitude onto the page, and I never got a reply. Eventually, I stopped trying to find out. I decided it was the church, or some charity, or some quiet wealthy person in town who helped struggling families and did not want to be thanked. I built a whole comforting story around it, that there was goodness in the world, anonymous and undeserved, that had reached down and saved my family in our worst hour. I kept that house. My children grew up in it. By the time the anonymous payments quietly stopped, 2 years on, I had gotten a full-time job, gotten back on my feet, and I went on to pay that mortgage myself for another 20 years until it was mine, free and clear. The mystery benefactor of 1986 became a piece of family lore. The miracle that saved us. The kindness from nowhere. We never knew who. For 39 years, we never knew who. I want to be honest about something, because it is part of why Carol's gift was so perfectly given. In the years that followed, I needed to believe it was a stranger. It was easier. A gift from a stranger you can simply receive, with gratitude, and then carry on. You do not owe a stranger. You cannot pay a stranger back, so you are free of the debt, free to just be grateful and live. If I had known it was a person in my own life, especially a person without much money, I would never have had a moment's peace. I would have spent every spare dollar trying to repay it. I would have felt the weight of it in every interaction. Carol knew that about me. She knew me better than I knew myself. And so she gave me the one form of the gift I could actually accept. The anonymous one, the one that asked nothing, the one that let me keep my pride and my house both. I did not understand, for 39 years, that the anonymity was not incidental to the gift. The anonymity was the gift. Carol died last December of a cancer that took her fast, 6 weeks from the diagnosis to the end. I was with her. Of course I was with her. I held her hand in that hospital room the way she had held mine through every dark night of 50 years, and the last thing she said to me, with that crooked grin she had even at the end, was that I had better keep our Tuesday booth warm. And then she was gone, and I lost the person who had known me longest and best in all the world, and the grief of it is a thing I am still learning to carry. Those 6 weeks were their own lifetime. I was at the hospital every day. We did not talk about dying much, Carol and I. We mostly just sat together, the way we always had. Except now it was a hospital room instead of a booth, and there was no toast to split. We held hands, and we laughed about old times, and sometimes we just sat in the comfortable silence of two people who have nothing left to prove to each other. I keep going back now, over those 6 weeks, looking for a sign, a moment when she might have been about to tell me, a hesitation, a look. I cannot find one. She carried the secret all the way to the edge, and over it, just as she had carried it for 39 years. Because telling me, even on her deathbed, would have handed me the debt at the one moment I could never repay it, and she would not do that to me. She protected my pride with her literal dying breath. Her husband had passed a few years before, and her children lived out of state, so it fell to me, as much as to anyone, to help sort through her house in the weeks after. It was its own kind of grief, going through Carol's things, touching the ordinary objects of a life I had watched her live. Her children came for the big decisions and the keepsakes, but the long, slow work of the papers, the filing cabinets, the financial records that have to be dealt with when someone dies, that I took on myself, partly to be useful, and partly, I think, because I was not ready to stop being in her house, in her life, just yet. And that is how, on a gray afternoon in January, alone in my dead best friend's study, I came to open the bottom drawer of an old filing cabinet and to find, in a plain manila folder gone soft with age, the secret she had kept from me for 39 years. The folder was labeled in Carol's handwriting with just one word, Marcia, my name. I opened it, thinking it would be old letters, photographs, the sweet sentimental things a friend keeps. And it was not. It was bank records. Carefully kept, decades old, the carbon copies and statements going yellow at the edges. And it took me a few minutes, sitting on the floor of her study, to understand what I was looking at. And when I did, the world tilted on its side. I almost did not open it, you know. For a moment I held it and thought, this is private, these are Carol's things, and then I remembered that it had my name on it, that whatever was inside, she had filed under me. So I opened it. And I have wished, in weak moments since, that I never had, because the knowledge is so heavy, but mostly I'm on my knees with gratitude that I did, that I got to know, finally, before I die too, exactly who and what my friend was. They were records of payments. Payments made in 1986 and 1987, and into 1988 to a mortgage account. My mortgage account. The anonymous payments. The miracle. The kindness from nowhere that had saved my house and my children and my whole life when my husband left. It had not come from the church. It had not come from a charity or a wealthy stranger. It had come from Carol, from my best friend, who had sat across from me in our booth every single Tuesday for the 39 years since, and let me tell the story of the mysterious benefactor 100 times, and never, not once, by so much as a flicker, let me know that the benefactor was her. And then I understood the rest of it, the part that brings me to tears even now, because I knew Carol's life as well as I knew my own, and I knew exactly what those payments had cost her. Because a gift is not measured by its size, it is measured by what it costs the giver. $1,000 from a rich person and $1,000 from a poor person are not the same $1,000 at all. And I knew, the instant I understood that the money had come from Carol, that it had not come from any surplus. Because Carol had no surplus. It had come straight out of the bone of her own family's survival. Every dollar she sent to my mortgage was a dollar her own children did not have, a comfort she and her husband went without, a thing she did not buy, a trip they did not take, a worry she took on so that I would not have to carry mine. She did not reach into a full pocket. She reached into an empty one and found a way to fill mine. Carol was not a wealthy woman. That is the thing. If a rich friend had quietly covered my mortgage, it would have been a beautiful kindness, but it would not have been what this was. In 1986, Carol and her husband were just getting by themselves, raising their own children on a tight budget, no cushion, no extra. There was no spare money in Carol's life to save my house with, which meant she had not given me money she had to spare. She had given me money she did not have. In the folder, along with the bank records, there were other things that told the story. A pay stub from a second job, an evening cleaning job at an office building that I never knew Carol had taken in 1986. I remembered now, with a fresh horror, that for a couple of years back then, Carol had been mysteriously busy some evenings, had begged off some of our plans, had seemed tired, and had laughed it away when I asked, said she was just helping out somewhere. She had been cleaning offices at night, to pay my mortgage. There was a receipt for a wedding ring, her grandmother's ring, that I had noticed she stopped wearing around that time, and that she told me she had put away for safekeeping. She had pawned it. to pay my mortgage. My best friend had taken a second job scrubbing floors at night and sold her grandmother's ring, in secret, while raising her own children on nothing, to save my family, and then she had sat across from me in our booth every Tuesday for the rest of her life, and let me believe it was a stranger. I sat on that study floor for a long time, piecing it together, and each piece was worse than the last. Worse meaning more beautiful, more costly, more unbearable. I thought about that whole period of our lives, 1986, 1987, with my new eyes, and so many small mysteries of those years suddenly made a terrible sense. The way Carol had started bringing her own coffee in a thermos to our booth for a while, instead of ordering, and laughed that she was watching her pennies. The way she had worn the same winter coat for years longer than she should have. The little economies I had noticed and thought nothing of, because we were all watching our money in those years. I had never once connected Carol's small sacrifices to my own salvation. Why would I? I did not know my salvation had a source, let alone that the source was sitting across from me every Tuesday, splitting my toast, wearing her old coat, having sold her grandmother's ring. There was a letter in the folder, too, sealed, with my name on it, and I understood that Carol had known I would be the one to find this, had perhaps arranged it so, and had written me the explanation she could never give me while she lived. I sat on her study floor, and I opened it with shaking hands. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely break the seal. I want you to understand, I had not cried like this since Carol died, since my mother died, since the worst nights of 1986. I was alone in my dead best friend's house, on the floor, holding a letter from beyond the grave, about to be told, in her own voice, the secret of the greatest kindness of my life. There are not many moments, in a long life, when you know that the next 30 seconds will change how you understand everything that came before. This was one of them. It was short. It was so completely Carol. It said, "Marcia, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have found my filing cabinet, and you finally know. Do not be angry with me for not telling you. I thought about it 10,000 times across the years, in our booth, with the words right there in my mouth. But I never did. And here is why. If you had known it was me, you would have spent the rest of your life trying to pay me back, and feeling beholden, and it would have changed what we were to each other. You would have looked at me across that table and seen a debt instead of a friend. I could not bear that. I did not do it to be owed. I did it because you and those babies were drowning and I had two hands, and I was not going to stand there and watch. It was the easiest decision I ever made, and the best money I never had. You would have done the same for me. Now stop crying and go keep our booth warm. I love you. Carol." I read it perhaps 20 times, sitting there on the floor as the winter light failed in the windows. I could hear her voice in every line, the briskness, the refusal to be sentimental, even about the most sentimental thing a person can do, the way she could love you ferociously and tell you to stop crying in the same breath. That was Carol exactly. She had spent her whole life doing enormous tender things and then waving off any acknowledgement of them, embarrassed by her own goodness, deflecting every thank you with a joke. The letter was her last word in a 50-year conversation, and it was perfectly her, and it broke me completely and put me back together at the same time. You would have done the same for me. And the thing is, she was right. I would have, but I never got the chance, because she got there first, quietly, at enormous cost, and then spent 39 years protecting me, even from the knowledge of what she had done, so that our friendship would never carry the weight of it, so that I would never feel I owed her, so that every Tuesday in our booth could be just two friends and never a creditor and a debtor. She did not just save my house. She paid extra, in a lifetime of silence, to make sure her gift never cost me my pride. I have had to reckon, since that January afternoon, with how completely I misunderstood the friendship I thought I knew best in all the world. I had always believed Carol and I were equals, two friends who gave and took in roughly even measure across the decades. I see now that I was carried, in the deepest crisis of my life, by a love so large and so secret that I lived inside its shelter for 40 years without ever knowing the shelter was there. Every Tuesday for 39 years, I sat across from the woman who had sold her grandmother's ring to save my children, and I did not know it. And she made very sure I did not know it. And she poured my coffee and split my toast and laughed at my jokes and never once let the enormity of what she had done put a single ounce of weight on our table. And I have had to forgive her a little too, which is a strange thing to say about someone who saved your life. Because there is a small grief tucked inside the enormous gratitude, and it is this: I never got to thank her. I never got to know, while she was alive, what she had done. And so I never got to look her in the eye across our booth and say, I know, Carol, I know what you did, and I love you beyond words for it. She took that from me, gently, on purpose, for my own sake, and I understand why. And still, there is a part of me that grieves the thank you I will never get to give. I have made my peace with it by deciding that she knew. She knew I would have said it. She knew my whole heart. She did not need to hear the words to know they were there. That is what 50 years buys you, the not needing to say it. But, oh, I would give anything to have said it. I think about all the times, over those years, that I tried to help Carol with this or that, the small ordinary kindnesses friends do, and how she would let me, gracious and easy, never once saying, never once even hinting, that the scales between us were not remotely even, that she had given me a gift I could never repay if I lived 1,000 years. She let me feel like an equal partner in our friendship because she knew that was the only way the friendship could survive what she had done. The secret was not a wall between us. It was the final hidden room of her love for me, a room she furnished and tended in the dark for 40 years, so that I could live comfortably in all the other rooms of the house. I still go to the booth. Every Tuesday, 9 in the morning, the corner booth on Brady Street, and the young waitress who works there now knows to leave it for me. The old woman who comes alone and orders 2 coffees and 1 toast, the way I always did when there were 2 of us. I drink my coffee and I let the other one go cold across the table where Carol used to sit, and I talk to her, out loud sometimes, quietly, and I tell her the things I would have told her, and I tell her, over and over, the thing I never got to say while she was alive, which is thank you, and I know now, and I love you too. The first Tuesday after I found out, I almost could not make myself go. The thought of sitting in that booth alone, now that I knew what I knew, now that every Tuesday of the last 39 years had been recolored, seemed more than I could bear. But I went because Carol told me to, with nearly her last breath, keep our booth warm, and because I understood that going was the one thing left that I could still do for her. So I went, and I sat in my seat facing the window, and I looked at the empty seat facing the door, and I ordered 2 coffees and 1 toast, and the young waitress, who had heard by then that my friend had passed, brought it without a word and touched my shoulder. And I sat there, and I wept, and I talked to Carol. And somewhere in that hour, the booth stopped being a place of pure grief and became, again, what it had always been, the safest place I have ever known. She is still there, in a way. I can feel her there. 50 years of Tuesdays do not just evaporate because one of you is gone. I told my children the truth, the whole of it, that the miracle of 1986 that they grew up hearing about, the anonymous benefactor who saved the house, was their Aunt Carol, who was not their aunt by blood, but was more family than most blood ever is. They wept. My son, who was 4 years old when his father left, who has no memory of that terrible year except that the house was always there, said that he had spent his whole life grateful to a stranger, and that to learn the stranger was Carol, whom he had loved his whole life, was almost too much to hold. We are putting up a little plaque, the children and I, in the diner by our booth, with Carol's name on it, so that the people who sit there in the years to come will know that something quietly enormous once happened across that table, even if they never know exactly what. My daughter, who was 6 that year, who remembers more than her brother does, who remembers the fear in our house even if she did not understand it, sat very still when I told her. And then she said something I have not stopped thinking about. She said, Mom, that means Carol gave up things her own kids needed to save us. She did that for someone else's children, And I said, yes, baby, she did. And my daughter, who is 55 years old now and a grandmother herself, put her face in her hands and cried for a woman who had quietly altered the entire course of our family before my daughter was old enough to even understand what was happening. We were all of us, living in the house that Carol saved. Every Christmas we ever had in it, every birthday, every ordinary Tuesday, we owed to a secret kindness none of us could see. The owner of the diner, when I told him the whole story and explained the little plaque I wanted to put up by our booth, would not let me pay for it, and will not let me pay for my coffee anymore either. He is a young man, the third owner since Carol and I first sat down there as young mothers, and he had no idea, until that day, that the two old women in the corner booth carried a story like that one. He cried, this big young man, right there behind his counter. He said he had always wondered about us, the regulars who came faithfully for 50 years, and that he was honored such a thing had happened under his roof, and that the booth would be ours as long as the place stood. So there is a small brass plaque on the wall by the window now, and it says only, for Carol and Marcia, and 50 years of Tuesdays. The strangers who sit there in the years to come will never know the whole of it, but they will know that a great love sat in that booth once, for a very long time. And I have done one more thing, the thing I think Carol would want most, though she would tease me for it. I have begun, quietly, anonymously, to do for a young struggling mother in my church what Carol did for me. She does not know who is helping her. She thinks it is a charity, a fund, a kindness from nowhere. I have built her the same comforting story I lived inside for 40 years. And every time I make a payment she will never trace, I feel Carol beside me in the booth, grinning that crooked grin, and I understand at last the secret she knew all along, which is that the very best gifts are the ones that cost you something, and ask nothing, and are never, ever signed. It is harder than Carol made it look, I will tell you that. To give in secret, to watch someone you are helping credit a stranger or luck or God, to stand near them and say nothing, to never collect the warm look of gratitude that is the small reward most of us quietly want for our kindnesses, that takes a kind of discipline of the heart I did not know I had until I tried it. Every instinct in you wants to be known, wants the person to understand that you love them, that it was you. Carol resisted that instinct for 39 years. I have managed it for a few months, and it has taught me more about what she was than the bank records ever could. The greatest love does its work in the dark and walks away without signing its name. I am only learning now, at 65, how rare and how hard that is, and how completely my friend embodied it for the whole of her life. So I want to leave you tonight with the two things my best friend taught me, one of them across 50 years, and one of them from the bottom drawer of a filing cabinet after she was gone. The first is for anyone lucky enough to have a friendship like the one I had with Carol, the 50-year kind, the second self kind. Do not take it for granted, not for one Tuesday. You think you have all the time in the world in that booth, and then, one winter, the cancer comes fast, and the seat across from you is empty, and you would give anything, for one more cold cup of coffee with the person who knew your whole story. Treasure the ones who have been there for all of it. There is no replacing them. When they are gone, no one else remembers the beginning. And the second thing is about the quiet givers, the ones who save you in secret. There may be, in your life, a kindness you have always credited to a stranger, to luck, to a charity, to God, that came in fact from someone close to you who never wanted the credit. The people who love you best often do their greatest work where you cannot see it, and ask for nothing, and carry the secret of it to protect your pride. So if you are ever the one in a position to save someone, consider doing it the way Carol did, quietly, anonymously, asking nothing, signing nothing. And if you are the one who was saved long ago by a kindness you could never trace, hold open the possibility that it was love, close and human love, and that somewhere a person you cherished sat across a table from you for years, glad beyond words just to watch you live in the house they saved and never needing you to know. Thank you for sitting with me tonight and for letting an old woman tell you about her friend. If this story reached you, call the person who has known you longest and keep their booth warm and come back and sit with me again soon.